Well, liberals have completely lost the plot. Not only are they not calling en masse for the freeing of publisher Julian Assange, who has been jailed for years for exposing government crimes, but they're now actively hunting down whistleblowers on behalf of the FBI, like in the case of the New York Times exposing the Pentagon document leaker. And now we discover they're threatening journalists with jail time for exposing government intrusion inside of big tech. Matt Taibbi, who was one of the journalists who published the Twitter files, testified to Congress about what he and other fellow journalists discovered. And we watched with horror as Democrats like Debbie Wasserman Schultz verbally accosted Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger for doing what traditional liberals would have previously championed, exposing government censorship and intrusion in our lives. Instead, Democrats have vilified and persecuted Taibbi for releasing the Twitter files. And now we discover they've gone as far as threatening jail time. One Democrat sitting on the committee Taibbi and Schellenberger testified in front of was Democrat Stacey Plaskett, the non-voting rep for the Virgin Islands. And last week, she sent a letter to Matt claiming he lied under oath and that under the federal perjury statute, providing false information is punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Now, remember, this is after an IRS agent made an unexpected visit to Matt Taibbi's home. Journalists are now being intimidated in this country by liberal Democrats and the henchmen they have working on their behalf. The letter written by Congresswoman Plaskett doesn't even actually point to any lie or falsehood Matt gave during his congressional testimony. She points to his Twitter files threads published on Twitter and says those threads contradict his testimony to Congress. Last I checked, tweets aren't under oath. Her beef is in a discrepancy between two different agencies with nearly identical acronyms. One is government agency CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and the other is a private entity called CIS, Center for Internet Security. So one is CISA, the other is CIS. In some tweets, Matt mixed up the two agencies in one tweet, actually, but later corrected them. However, when Matt was in front of Congress, he made no errors in his testimony. He claimed both groups were working alongside EIP, which is the Election Integrity Partnership, which comprises of academic institutions to coordinate flagging and censoring information on Twitter. Yet Representative Stacey Plaskett claims Matt lied under oath when he did no such thing. What's even possibly worse than a member of Congress abusing their power by accusing an American citizen and a journalist of perjury with zero evidence is where she got this idea. She watched MSNBC. Similar to how journalists with the New York Times hunted down the Pentagon document leaker on behalf of the FBI, it was MSNBC's Mehdi Hasan who first accused Matt of lying under oath. Matt Taibbi joins us now. Matt, welcome to the show.
How are you doing, Kim?
I'm doing okay. I don't have these types of problems that you have come across by exposing government intrusion into our lives. This is outrageous. What was it? This was all stemming from your appearance on Mehdi Hasan, although really it was prior to that even because they sent out the IRS to intimidate you, calling you all kinds of names during the congressional hearing, saying you're a so-called journalist, that you're working with Elon or that you're his, whatever they're trying to smear you as. What was it that Mehdi Hasan...
And a direct threat to all people they oppose or something like that. That was another good one.
Yeah. I'm really genuinely frightened for the country that we're living in when this type of thing goes on. So Mehdi Hasan accused you of what did he actually accuse you of? Because it didn't even make sense.
So I went on Mehdi's show and it was a terrible interview, and I plainly admit I was being cocky. I was trying to make a point about MSNBC not facing up to their critics over the years. They had not invited me on ever since the beginning of the Russiagate business. They hadn't had anybody on who had presented an alternative view of all sorts of issues that they had gotten wrong. And I thought by going on and facing their tough interviewer, that it would, it would make a point about how part of the job in journalism is facing your critics, and that this is how we arrive at the truth. Sometimes, you get questioned about things. Sometimes you find out that you make a mistake. and I was unprepared, and he found a couple of mistakes that I made in a tweet, which I plainly admit. There was a tweet um, where here's what happened in the very beginning of the Twitter files. One of the first things we did is we spent a lot of time looking at the 2020 election, and because of that, we were looking over and over and over again at these content moderation decisions involving Stanford's election integrity partnership and its various partners. And so I had seen countless complaints that had been elevated to Twitter, and there were a lot of acronyms involved. The CIS, CISA, EIP, OIP, EIISAC. There's a whole lot of them. And we did that in the early Twitter files, and then we dropped it for about 2 months, and I went back to do 2 later stories about Stanford. And in the middle of that, I lost track of a couple of those acronyms, and I mistook CIS for CISA in one of the acronyms. So he caught me on that, and when he presented me with it on the air, I immediately recognized, oh my God, I did make a mistake, and I said so. And then there was a mixed up date. He caught that. That was all in bounds. These were all totally in bounds questions. I don't think there's such a thing as an ambush interview. You're either prepared or you're not. What went wrong was afterwards, he went on Twitter and complained and accused me of lying to Congress. And in doing so, suggested that CISA did not have a close relationship with Stanford's election integrity project. He said that what I had done is substitute a civil society organization for an intelligence agency, and that was a major substantive difference. He apparently didn't know that all 3 of them were close partners. And so he made a mistake, which I pointed out, Li Fang pointed out, everybody pointed out, but he didn't concede. And first Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saw it, and then I guess Stacey Plaskett saw it, and now they want to take me to prison over a mistake that they're making, which is mind-blowing.
Right, because they're saying that the whole premise of you coming to Congress, the premise of these Twitter files was to expose the fact that the government was censoring Americans or twisting Twitter's arm to censor Americans, or working in tandem or in conjunction or whatever it might be, right? It was all of the above, actually. So they're saying, no, it wasn't the government because of this, the difference between CIS and CISA. CISA is an organization under the Department of Homeland Security. It's a government agency. CIS is not. That's a private entity altogether, even though they do have government contracts. So they're saying
not only that, they had $38 million from DHS that year. So it's very confusing. But anyway, go ahead.
Right. So they're saying this, and this would be a substantive distinction if they were right. If they were right, it would matter whether it was CISA or CIS. If the government, if the mistake was it wasn't CISA, it was just CIS, then it was not the government at all. And that would actually be a substantive difference between government interference and private entities working with other private entities, right? But, and so that's what they're essentially trying to pin on you. They're trying to say, you made a substantive error. The government did not do this on purpose. And you went to Congress and lied under oath, claiming a government agency did this. And in reality, it was a private agency this entire time. But in reality, you just made a mistake on one tweet where you identified the wrong agency in that particular instance for that particular thing that you were talking about. But in reality, CISA was absolutely involved at the Twitter doing the censorship alongside CIS, alongside EIP, alongside all of those other alphabet soup, agencies.
Yeah.
So that's a massive.
So it's kind of amazing. So she wrote in her letter to me. I should read from this because it's kind of amazing. You were she wrote, rather, you were alleging that CISA, a government entity, was working with the EIP to have posts removed from social media. When presented with this misinformation, and by that she means on MSNBC, you acknowledged that you had made an error. So she's saying it's misinformation that CISA was working with EIP. Now, not only do we have, email after email and request after request that ended up at Twitter that has the names of all three organizations on it, but these organizations openly embrace their relationships. Like EIP on its own website says the EIP partnered with CISA in 2020. CIS on its website, there's a news release that says CIS CISA to block malicious websites for state local governments. You can look on the sort of web search for government awards and find that CIS got $37.9 million from the DHS that year. And there's just, both Lee and I have shown, a stack of these communications involving CISA and EIP. There's nobody is questioning that they had a very close relationship. I mean, there are graphics where they talk about, our partners at CISA, at EIP. So this is something that nobody's ever claimed that there wasn't a relationship, except for these people, Mehdi Hassan and Stacy Plaskett, which is so I'm baffled by the whole thing.
Okay, so I think that none of us are really surprised at the behavior of MSNBC or Mehdi, right? I think that all of us can kind of be like, okay, yeah, this is kind of par for the course with MSNBC, that they're going to be making these accusations. I mean, we watched them do Russiagate, as you mentioned when you were on a show, for years, and they don't correct their errors. They make a lot of wild accusations and a lot of wild assumptions. It doesn't seem to faze them. But I think the most concerning thing about this is that a sitting member of Congress watched MSNBC or paid attention to Mehdi Hassan and then sent you an official letter from the government saying that you committed perjury that is punishable up to 5 years. We expect more from members of our government. We would expect them to at least do their due diligence. And according to Li Feng's research on this and reporting on this, which he's done an excellent job of this, he says that he discovered from the metadata in that letter that it wasn't just Stacy Plaskett who sent you this, but it was numerous members of the Democratic Party who have their footprint all over this thing. So it's more than just her. It's a number of them and an attorney drafted the letter. How did they not do their due diligence to at least fact check MSNBC, which desperately needs to be fact checked? How did they not fact check this to ensure that they weren't threatening an American citizen, a journalist, and using this as an intimidation tactic, unless that's exactly what they meant to do? And that's where we're at this phase in our government, which is very dangerous.
The only thing I can conclude is that they're indifferent to whether or not it's true, and that it's meant as an intimidation tactic. Certainly, people who are in my position who might think about testifying in Congress about a contentious issue, or one that would be poorly received, let's say, by the Democratic Party, they're going to wonder, am I going to say something that's going to end up with me, facing some kind of charge? I mean, this is the kind of thing that went on in HUAC, back in the 50s, which is ironic because Mehdi brought that up in our interview. He made some kind of comparison to, I guess I had made the mistake of saying it was an honor to talk to Congress, and he said, well, it's not an honor to talk to every congressional committee. Think about the House Un-American Affairs Committee. But this is what happened with HUAC in the 50s. Like, you had witnesses come and they said things, and then they would end up in jail for contempt of Congress. Those were some of the darkest days in American history. And the only thing I can think of is that they want people to be nervous about doing this kind of reporting. I mean, that's kind of the subtext of the Assange thing, the Snowden, revelations, right? Like, if there's a very definite message sent when someone comes forward and they end up in exile, and the people who lie about it under oath in Congress get jobs on MSNBC, right? So,
Yeah.
they must be sending a message. That's the only thing I can think of.
Okay, so according to this letter, you have until tomorrow to respond to the following 7 questions that they listed on here. So, um, I mean, what is your next step on this? I hope you have an attorney, I guess. If I got a letter like this, I think I would be lawyering up, I suppose.
I do.
Um,
I have an attorney. Yeah, I haven't. Actually haven't consulted with him yet, but I'm going to. My understanding is, well, I'm not going to get into that.
right, right.
I'll have to let that question go for now.
Sure, sure. Okay, well, definitely am wishing you the best of luck on this thing, for all of us,
Thank you.
not just. I mean, did you ever think you would be in this situation? I mean, Did you ever
No,
think that this day would come where you are targeted by the U.S. government similarly to Julian Assange in a lot of ways? I mean, this is heading in that direction,
I mean
unfortunately.
it's funny because I grew up really loving books like Catch 22 and Confederacy of Dunces, and these sort of farcical comedies about uh, how absurd politics can get, and sometimes how simultaneously absurd and vicious, right? Like, that's kind of the lesson of a lot of the great Russian satires that I grew up reading, like Master and Margarita. And this is a little bit like that. I mean, I'm obviously not a character like Assange. He was a global consequence what he was doing, but this kind of move is straight out of like some kind of satirical novel. It's cartoonish. So I almost don't know how to respond to it. Like, part of me wants to laugh about it, but at the same time, I have kids and they're threatening they're
Right.
threatening jail. So I
They
I
are.
don't know what to think. Yeah.
And everybody should be absolutely outraged by this. Anybody who's in media, anybody who's a journalist, anybody who cares about free speech should be absolutely terrified, mortified, condemning this, calling for Stacey Plaskett's resignation, and for anyone else who is behind this letter, they should resign. This is not the America that we know. This is not the America that we love. At least it shouldn't be, and it looks like we're marching closer and closer to that. Before I let you go, I have to ask you about this feud that's going
Mhm.
on with you and Elon Musk and Substack. You've left Twitter apparently, and well, you still have your account there, but I don't know if you're using it.
Yeah.
But there's an issue with Substack and Elon and Twitter, and then there's you personally being targeted by Elon Musk after you were the. I mean, you're getting it from all sides, Matt. What in the world? You can't make anybody happy, which I guess that means you are doing your job. Um,
Yeah, I don't know. It might just be bad luck.
yeah,
The
like who
the
did you
the
piss off
Substack thing.
karmically that this is going on right now?
That's an interesting question, right? Like, I must have stepped on a karmic rake somewhere, but the Elon thing honestly, it's so funny because I think it's just a misunderstanding. Really, like, I'm caught between a dispute between these two companies. I worked for Substack. I mean, I was a Substack contributor when I started doing the Twitter files. And when he started blocking links, I wrote to him and essentially just said, "Well, what do you want me to do? I mean, if I can't share my work, I can't really use Twitter." And
Right.
things just kind of devolved from there. And so, the odd thing is, I like Elon. I think he's done a lot of really positive things. I think, he has great ideas, and I think with Twitter, he's tried to do some really interesting things in terms of, like, transparency and openness. But when you censor a journalist that you had a relationship with, it tends to undermine the argument. So I feel bad about the whole thing, honestly.
Well, it is a strange move. I don't feel like Substack Notes, which apparently is the beef. Twitter views this new feature with Substack as a competition. But from my perspective, as somebody who doesn't write on Substack, I'm not a writer. I wouldn't. I mean, I use Notes, but that's because I have a particular job that I need to see and pay attention to what people are talking about and what they're writing about, and so I'm on there. But I don't think the average person would go and join Substack Notes necessarily and replace Twitter with that. Um, Unless they've there may be things going on behind the scenes where they've stated outright they're going to become the new Twitter, in which case, okay, I suppose Twitter would want to block its competition. But I get it from your perspective that, well, if that's where your livelihood is on Substack, then Twitter is, for many of us, more of a promotional tool, right? That's like what Twitter is used for. So
And
if you
it's great
can't,
at that.
and it is great at that. It is great at that. So it is kind of a weird thing. But now what's going on with the Twitter files? Because I'm hearing that he's not, like, Elon isn't going to allow the Twitter files to, but I just saw some Twitter files dropped today actually about Fauci. And I know more are coming Monday. I'm going to be covering it and speaking with the journalists that actually are dropping those files on Monday. But because they've got more coming apparently. But so are the Twitter files still there, or is it just your Twitter files are not there, or like what's happening with that?
Mine are back.
Oh, they were gone?
They were gone, yeah. But I think I'm out, obviously. I'm not sure that there are going to be more searches done. He seemed to indicate that that's not going to happen anymore. Look, to be honest, I knew in the first week of the Twitter Files project that it was temporary. Like there was no way that this was going to continue for any length of time, because the material was just too explosive. I thought that he was going to be shut down from some quarter or another, and we would probably find out about that sooner rather than later. Frankly, it went on longer than I thought already. But it's still a sad thing. I think he had the right idea, and I hope I hope other business leaders are moved to do kind of the same thing, because a lot of people they took a lot of solace, but really, in kind of seeing behind the scenes a little bit, I think, for the first time in a while. So
Yeah,
I hope it's not the end.
what we
Mhm.
suspected ended up being true. I mean, that's
Right.
everybody had these suspicions, and then they were verified throughout the Twitter files. And I would love to see the same sort of transparency in all the social media companies. If they would just open up their books for us all to see.
Oh
Uh,
God, Google.
yeah,
Wouldn't you love to see Google?
I
God,
would absolutely love to see what the inner workings at YouTube. When they were censoring, and they still censor all of many of us were censored on YouTube, and it would be really nice to see where they got that, who was working with them to decide this person and this person and this account, this channel, demonetize, wipe them off the platform entirely. Would love to see that, but
hmm
yeah.
hmm
So that's it. So you're not going to be on Twitter anymore. You're on Substack exclusively now, or what's the deal?
I mean, I'm not. There are some people who do these like 10,000 word. I'm not going to be on Twitter anymore, or essays. That's really not what. I mean, I might go back on. I just um, at the moment it feels a little weird. I'm still, I think, being shadow banned a little bit, and um, I have always had this idea that I think the consumer's only move in that situation is to not use the platform. So uh, it's not something I really enjoy, being in conflict with Twitter. I really love the Twitter files, period, but I don't think I have a whole lot of options in this situation. So
Yeah, it is odd. It is odd that he would then do the very thing that he says he's not going to do, right? Which is censor people, and then you, a person who was releasing Twitter files, got shadow. You were banned, and your links weren't working, and the Twitter files disappeared. I mean, it's childish, actually. It's pretty childish.
I mean, he might have been hurt. I can understand that.
I mean, but my gosh,
You
were you guys
know.
dating? I mean, that's what
Yeah, no, exactly. Right. Yeah, it's not that kind of relationship, one would think,
right.
um but who knows? Who knows what I mean, look, I always, whenever I meet people who um I mean, I've only known a few billionaires in my life, but
Yeah.
certainly their lives are not like ours. So, who
But they're
knows,
not that
right?
different. I have spent significant time with very wealthy, with billionaires, even very wealthy people in my line, throughout my career, and yeah, they're the worries are a bit different. It's fun. It's interesting because us normal people, we worry about having enough money to pay our bills. We worry about money. Money's a stressor in most people's lives, and when you're a billionaire, you'd expect that stressor to go away, but they actually stress about money just as much. They stress about being sued constantly, people constantly trying to take it from them. They almost, I mean, they have, it's interesting how humans don't change. We just change maybe what we worry about, but the worry is still there. It's just slightly different, but it's
Right?
interesting.
Yeah. I think also billionaires can get into a place where they can be like, you know, they can go from being liquid to being, minus $8 billion in debt,
Right. Right.
pretty quickly. And
Right.
even though you've got the trappings all around you, you're actually more broke than the person you're running into in the street. I think that's a common kind of problem for very rich, and so I try to
Well,
be
problems we don't
sympathetic,
have,
but
so whatever.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly,
we don't
yeah,
really know.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, must be tough. Must be tough being a billionaire. So,
Right, yeah,
um,
I mean, I try up to a point to be sympathetic, so,
right, right.
yeah.
And then yeah. Matt, well, thank you for being on and talking about this. Just what really just frightening stuff to learn about. And again, I think everybody, no matter if they agree with you and your viewpoints and Twitter files and all of that or not, should be absolutely outraged by the behavior of members of Congress and also of Medi, honestly, should be outraged. And the New York Times, like exposing this it's like acting now as henchmen. We're now seeing journalists, outlets acting as the police now and saying this person did something bad, go after them. And
Yeah,
the government then responding.
that is that is such a shock to me because, again, if you're raised in the kind of the old journalist ethos, we're supposed to be like doctors when it comes to information. Like, we don't care. We've seen it all, right? Like, if you come in and you've done something terrible to yourself, like, whatever. We're not. Our job is just to fix it, right?
Right. Right.
Um, and this idea that you're going to get into a moral frenzy about somebody passing around secret documents in a Minecraft room, that's going to be your big takeaway, as opposed to worrying about the newsworthiness of the documents. Like, that should be like 99% of your concern. and
Right.
and narking out the person that you're reporting on. Think about the messages that sends to everybody else who's ever going to think about talking to that newspaper. Like,
Yeah.
am I going to go to the New York Times and talk to them about this document that I have that talks about the
No
United
way.
States spying on other countries? No, right? Like, you got to worry about that stuff, and it blows my mind that they've so subsumed themselves into this role of being henchmen or part of this political thing. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about, but it's
Yeah.
crazy, I think.
Yeah. Um, Again, the world we're living in now. Never thought I would see this
Yeah.
day in my lifetime. I'm sure you didn't either when you're reading all those books. Yes, and here we
No.
are. Yeah, here we are. So Matt, thank you so much for joining the show, and best of luck to you. And let us know
Thanks so
any way
much,
we can
Kim.
help. So thanks, Matt.
I I hope it doesn't come to that, but thank you, Kim. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me tell you about our sponsor, Field of Greens. Now, you've heard me raving about Field of Greens, the ultimate solution to sneak all of your daily fruits and veggies into your diet by mixing a powder into your ice water. Well, now Brickhouse has released a new product that I've been loving. It's called Lean, and it's here to save the day by suppressing your hunger cravings and assisting your body in dumping those extra sugars. This helps you maintain a healthy metabolism and keeps you motivated to reach your leaner, healthier self. Now, I'll admit I was a bit hesitant at first because I tend to get a bit jittery with these types of products, but I'm happy to say that Lean doesn't give me any of those negative side effects, or really any negative side effects at all. It's actually been working really well, and it does curb cravings and it does curb hunger. So if you'd like to try it or any of the other products, Head to fieldofgreens.com and use the promo code KIM to get 15% off your first order.